For those of you watching, I am talking with Dr. Dann Wigner today, and he wrote the book Just Begin, which our Advent and Christmas formation series is, we are featuring the practices from this book in the series. We've named it, Dan, Choose Your Own Adventure.
I love that.
And each week we're covering one of your sections of the book. And then in the week, people can choose which practices from the section they want to, use as their Advent practice that week. So choose your own adventure. Of course, it goes like all the way through Epiphany, so it's not 100% aptly named, but here we are. Anyway, people may have met you, I guess, when your wife, Mother Leanne, was serving as supply priest here back in the spring. But just in case people haven't met you, do you mind introducing yourself to those folks who are watching?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I have been there a few times with my wife. She is the Episcopal chaplain at the Canterbury Ministry at Texas Tech University. And so we live in Lubbock. We also have a little boy, Clark. What I kind of do right now for my full time is I teach at All Saints Episcopal School in Lubbock, Texas. And I've my background, I've done a lot of teaching and librarianship over the years. And a lot of my academic area is in mystical theology and transpersonal sociology, and that's kind of at least the soil that Just Begin kind of sprang up out of. So
now, correct me if I'm wrong, don't you have like 2 doctorates, one of them in theology and one in sociology?
It's actually one. It's a British PhD, and you typically in the United States you would have a sociology PhD, and then sociology of religion is a subset under that. In England, it's a theology PhD, and then sociology of religion is a subset under it. So kind of sounds like 2, but it's really just one.
Tell us a little bit about like why did you decide to write this book?
Well, the book it actually started in several stages. I'd say probably a good third of the book is actually started out as my website, spiritualitystepbystep.com, where I first started structuring how to start with a practice in that way, where you'll notice each chapter is there's a little bit of background, and then as simplest as I can make it, a step-by-step method to get people started, some variations, and then just, excuse me, frequently asked questions, resources for further study, if you really like that practice sort of thing. And all of that really started because I've off and on through the years taught how to do certain specific spiritual practices in like a workshop or a Christian education kind of setting. And I often had people comment that they'd always wanted to try that practice before, but it seemed so daunting or confusing, or they thought there was only one right way to do it. And so I really like to focus on giving people just enough to get started, and then you can explore and experiment. And so that kind of model for talking about spiritual practices is where I got the idea. And then that kind of idea, I workshopped it, it became into the website, and then eventually into a book. So kind of step by step.
Now I want to point out one more time your website. I think we're going to be sending people to the website a couple of times throughout our series here. Can you go ahead and give that to us one more time?
Yes, it's spiritualitystepbystep.com. Just no capitals, no dashes, just all as one word.
Wonderful.
You could also, if you typed in my name, danwigner.com, it should lead you there too. So
Great, because I have looked extensively through your website and found it to be like quite a resource. You've got quite a bit of stuff there so that, people, if they maybe are intimidated to, well, nobody's doing classes in person right now, but if they had been intimidated to go to, say, a centering prayer group or class, they could go and look at your website, figure out what the deal is behind it, and then that kind of gives them a door into getting into the practice. So I really liked how you laid it out as a step-by-step guide for every practice. Like, it's just really super handy. And I commend everyone watching to go visit it. So you've got a lot of spiritual practices on there, and you say a little bit about spiritual experiences.
mm-hmm.
Can you tell us how you define a spiritual experience? What is a spiritual experience?
Okay. Though I guess really I try to divide the two in that spiritual practices are things that you intentionally set out to do. And that typically have a step-by-step thing. Spiritual experiences are the things that happen to us, and then we kind of have to, deal with later. And sometimes they can be very subtle. Sometimes they can be very dramatic. A lot of stories in the Bible and history and such, of visions and dreams and very radical experiences, but also just, anything from like those eureka moments when something just connects, the light bulb turns on, or, seeing a sunset or a sunrise, and just that time it hits you particularly well, but just as a whole range to see spiritual experiences like that. And I don't feel like the two are completely disconnected, because I feel like spiritual practices prepare us for those type of experiences when they might happen, and also help us to interpret them after they've happened. But definitely I'd see spiritual experiences. It's not like you can set a time, from 4 to 4:30. I'm going to go have my spiritual experience. idea.
But you could try to maximize your chance of having those spiritual experiences by establishing some spiritual practices in your life,
Right.
so that you are poised to encounter God, or to recognize God, after the fact.
And I have a book that is in pre-publication. I'm kind of shopping around for publishers of. I've created a spiritual practice that's not in Just Begin. That is how to have a small group reflect on a spiritual experience that someone's had, so that everybody can grow from it. So kind of bringing a spiritual practice into when someone has a spiritual experience, how can the group grow from that?
Okay, I love this. As you may know, we have a kind of fledgling small group ministry going on here. We started it in September. We've got about 90 adults that participate, and somewhere between 15 and 20 youth that participate. And so quite a few folks in our small groups. And I think that would be a really interesting thing for us to look at in the future. So you'll have to let me know when that is in the world, and we'll come back to it.
Sounds great.
Tell me about what spiritual practices have helped shape you to be the person that you are today.
Okay. Well, I have to say, really, probably more than any one particular practice, it is the process of exploration and experimentation. And that is a particular approach. I mean, there are some people who actually say, there are very specific steps for what you do in the spiritual life, and you have to do them in a specific order, that sort of thing. But I really kind of like to cast a wide net to see what resonates with each person. So I guess that if that could be considered a spiritual practice of its own, I would say definitely that one. But and all of the practices in Just Begin, I have practiced before. Some just a few times, others, maybe for a season of my life, it was really important, but then, kind of faded away. But I would say really 3 practices, all of which I talk a lot about in Just Begin, have been seminal to my life. And that is centering prayer, mindfulness meditation, which has a lot of variations, and Lectio Divina. So those have all been very, very helpful to me.
And I think we're going to feature each of those in the coming weeks. Actually, this week we'll be featuring Lectio Divina, and then I think next week for mindfulness meditation, excuse me. Like if you had a desert island, like you can only take one spiritual practice with you. Like if you could only pick one, what would be your, what's your all-time desert island pick?
Yeah. Well, I would pick centering prayer. That's one that for I guess well over a decade now I've done every day, and it is really the foundational practice for me. It is what I use. I feel like it's the most consistent practice for me that builds kind of an inner quiet that helps me to be attentive to God speaking or seeing God acting and moving, everywhere else in the world. So that one is definitely my desert island practice. That and the book, How to Make a Raft for Dummies. So.
I think that might be cheating, but yeah.
So.
And it depends on the resources of the island, but I digress.
Right.
I think centering prayer is underrated. I guess I once heard a Catholic sermon that advocated for centering prayer as like the wellness practice. And I thought that was so interesting that, it really is part of our tradition. It's ancient. Lots of different folks practice it, and for good reason. I mean, on the days, and I'm not as faithful with centering prayer as you are, but on the days that I do practice centering prayer, I find that it's a lot easier for me to focus on the tasks in front of me, and it's a lot easier to give people my full attention later in the day. And not that that's why we do practices, is that they produce this good fruit in our lives, but also side benefit, they produce this great fruit in our lives. So, it's a good reason to just begin.
Absolutely.
How has that shaped the pandemic for you? Like, how do your spiritual practices inform the pandemic? Or conversely, like, how has the pandemic affected your spiritual practices?
Well, I have to say, like, as far as individual spiritual practices, it's in many ways kind of presented more time, but that also kind of comes with it a kind of a natural reduction in more community and social spiritual practices, or at least the ones that we can take for granted. You have to get a little bit more creative. Like things with Zoom, for instance, become a lot more important, and also, like streaming and services and stuff like that has been a bit of a challenge. I will have to say, so I guess for individual practices, it may have been, kind of a good time to build up on those. But some of the ones that I feel are very, very essential, like say the Eucharist, that has been a big challenge, through the pandemic. And I feel like in order to maintain balance, a person needs both kinds, so. But hopefully, I guess knock on wood, but that the pandemic, we can find a way to bring back the more social aspects stronger, and to have learned, how to utilize technology, for instance. I mean, I have to say, things like, where I've done, workshops and small groups before, I've had to experiment more with videos and Zoom and stuff, and see how that can impact spiritually and not. So,
it's been
kind of a roving answer to that question.
No. It's been, I think, challenging for everyone to adapt to the changes, but I think I agree with you, just in terms of having a little more time to do some of these practices individually, I think has been a blessing. And it's one of the reasons we chose to look at the practices in Just Begin at this time of the year, because it's getting darker outside. A lot of people have taken up walking as a sort of spiritual discipline, and now it's getting colder.
Oh.
And so, I feel like people need to really dig into some of these things to make it through that slump that is presented, between now and when the days start getting longer again, between now and when we start to see widespread use of a vaccine. It's just hard to cope sometimes with everything being new. They say that people are working at 60% of our normal productivity because we're spending so much time processing just grief and different side effects of the pandemic that we didn't predict. And so we're hoping, at least from the formation side, that looking at some of these practices is going to give people some hope, give them something to hang on to, give them more encounters with God. As we do this waiting and watching in Advent, hopefully we'll be able to see the subtle ways that God is showing up all the time. So that's the hope for us. And we sure thank you for writing a book that will help facilitate that for our people. Where can we get the book?
Well, you can go to my website, spiritualitystepbystep.com. That's a good place to go. It is also available on Amazon, and or you can go directly to Church Publishing, their website. They publish it, so you can order it directly from them. So hopefully one of those ways is a good way to get it.
Nice. I think we ordered every copy that we could from those 3 publishers right as we were starting. Okay. So people may have a little trouble finding it, but I did notice before I started talking with you today that there are 4 copies back on Amazon. We cleared their shelves, but now they have 4. So I don't know about Church Publishing. I didn't check that right before, but I hope that if people are interested, they will go ahead and grab a copy of your book if they haven't come up here and grabbed one already. All right. Hey, take care of yourself. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night.